Welcome to this episode of the Selling to Corporate podcast, where I am bringing on the amazing Gemma Allies to the show. And I'm super, super excited about it because we are having an awesome conversation today about not only how she's changed her business over the last 10 months that she's been inside the C-suite, how she has increased her fees, how she has embedded new services like keynote speaking to her business, but also something that I think is hugely topical at the moment, using a sales process when you are neurodiverse. So Gemma is an ADHD awareness expert, and she works with retail organizations to support them in helping to make their working environments inclusive and equal for all people. Her particular specialism is on supporting these organizations to raise awareness of ADHD in the workplace and help them to make legal, reasonable adjustments so that they can make sure their employees are being as productive as they can be and that they're working in safe, supportive environments where they really can have their best performance. And that's really exciting for me. And it's also really close to my heart. I was diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year, ADHD and autism. So yay, that's what you call overachieving. And it was a real pleasure for me to be able to work with Gemma inside the C-suite and to continue to do that, to really help more organizations see what they could be missing out of in terms of harnessing their neurodiverse talent and making it easier to work in those workplaces when you do have different needs and when you want adjustments to be made so that you can be better at your job. So if you are interested in all things ADHD or neurodiversity, and you're interested in how you can transition your business from being seen as a nice to have to a commercially critical component inside an organization, then this episode is for you. And I really, really hope that you enjoy this conversation genuinely as much as I've enjoyed recording it. Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Okay, for those of you who weren't on the pre-record chat that Gemma and I have just had, I'm really excited to invite Gemma and her little dog Ruby, who is also a Chihuahua, to the podcast. And I was hoping for simultaneous snorts, but apparently Ruby's upstairs, so that won't necessarily happen. But Gemma, on your own, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me, Jess. It's so nice to be here.
I'm so excited. I know it's always a bit weird when you come onto a podcast that you've listened to previously, and now you're like famous.
I know. I feel very privileged to be here. I've spent many a month listening to the podcast and absorbing all of your little pearls of wisdom. So it feels very strange to be on the other side of the fence, but it's a sign that maybe I'm doing something right. So
you're lots of things right. And I'm excited to kind of go into some of the journey today, because you've had a lot of different changes over your business in the time that you've been in the C-suite. But first, let's do the important stuff. Who are you? What is your business? What do you do?
my name is Gemma Allies. I work primarily with companies in the retail sector to support them with ADHD awareness so that they can embed more inclusive ways of working and help their workforce become more productive.
And it's been a bit of a change, hasn't it, really? Because ADHD awareness, when you joined the C-suite, you weren't narrowing down to that. You were covering off mindfulness and strategies to support like wider scale mental health and stress initiatives. And then you've zoned in on this laser focus, which has actually been really, really successful for you. Very excited about. What made you realize that ADHD awareness was something that particularly retail organizations needed to be looking at?
It was really interesting, actually, and I've been reflecting quite a bit on this because I, prior to joining the C-suite, was running my business part-time alongside my employment, which was quite hands-on and didn't require a great deal of deep focus time. And then as I focused in on my business full time and was needed to be sat down for long periods of time working, I started to really become more aware of some of the symptoms of my own ADHD. And in that typical ADHD way, started to hyper focus in on what I was going through and also the impact that it's having on other people like me within the workplace. So I began sharing some of the techniques that I developed myself through my own mindfulness practice and ways of managing the symptoms with retail organizations. And I received a lot of positive feedback and uptake. And I noticed that there was a great deal of need for more support within corporate organizations and a real knowledge gap as to how they can be helped. So my first-hand experience was really, really insightful in being able to do that. And it's just been a really interesting journey, not only of self-reflection and learning, but also to recognize the fact that the workplace isn't set up for people like myself with ADHD, but there are some amazing benefits that we bring to an organization. So it was just a case of how can we leverage those whilst also helping manage some of the challenges that we face and also challenge some of the stereotypes and discrimination practices that often the corporate world still practice without necessarily realizing. It's definitely been a really interesting journey for both myself personally, but also recognizing where the gaps are in the corporate world as well.
It's a massive thing though, isn't it? I know that you and I have had chats about this relatively frequently because over the last couple of months, obviously, the ADHD world has been kind of shook by the fact that medication is basically non-existent right now, which is really, really difficult for a lot of people. And so the work that you're doing to support these organizations in terms of helping even just managers to understand what people are actually struggling with and what we can do differently to make working environments more inclusive and equal for everybody by making really small adjustments. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's really interesting. A lot of what drew me to you in the C-suite was so many of the parallels that I recognized both in your career and mine, in that I came out of corporate largely because I was dealing with quite a serious autoimmune illness and also a case of undiagnosed ADHD, which meant I really wasn't set up for the environment that I was working in at the time. And this was 10 years ago. So a completely different world to what we have today, in that there was just no awareness and no real even wellness support in the places that I worked. So it's been amazing to see the conversation shift in a positive direction and some of these adjustments that are starting to come through. But I think a lot of the case, if you're not neurodivergent, you don't know what you don't know. So there's a real need to help educate companies as to how we can best leverage people with ADHD who have so much to offer, but are just different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's deficient in any way. It doesn't mean that we're not great workers. I know that, and you know that, but it's important that in order to get the best out of people, organizations have some education and understanding around that.
I really love that. Different, not deficient. Like that should be your tagline.
Yeah,
that's really nice. But it is that kind of thing, isn't it? I think it's also very difficult because I think there's a lot of negative media, particularly around ADHD and neurodivergence as a whole at the moment. And I know that even I was saying to one of my really good friends when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I was like, oh, I've had this diagnosis. And she was like, I just don't really believe it's a thing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. cool. And so I know that it's quite a contentious thing. And like my friend, she's absolutely lovely and meant absolutely no harm by it. And when I explained some of the things that I perhaps do differently or have to manage differently, she was like, oh God, I didn't realize that was it. I just thought it was kind of like naughty kids at school being a bit hyperactive. And when she started to realize, oh, okay, actually, there are very different looks to this and coping strategies that people use, she was super supportive. But I think that initial reaction is quite common now. And actually, that's really difficult for organizations because if you want to get the best out of people, you have to make an environment safe for them to say, hey, these are the reasonable adjustments that I need to be made. And for them to be able to say it and their manager to be like, oh, okay, cool, we get that. This is what we can do, rather than being like, oh, that's not a real thing. Because you and I have both had that, I'm sure, in terms of ADHD, but also in terms of having autoimmune diseases. People will be like, oh, that's not a real thing. That's yuppie flu.
Visible. And I think there is definitely a culture of gaslighting around any sort of invisible illness or disability or neurodiversity, because people seem to need that evidence in order to sadly believe. My job is to help close some of those ignorances around what it is. And sadly, the media don't do a great deal in some certain pockets to support that. And I've seen comments online, they need a good kick up the arse, and all these really, excuse me, am I allowed to say that? All these really outdated, backwards narratives, which are obviously being fed into the mainstream, sadly. And I think there's this risk as well that it becomes this sort of agenda or woke agenda, I've seen it referred to.
Yeah.
And it's simply not the case. The reason that we're seeing so many more people become diagnosed and speak about it is because of education and awareness. It's not because people want to suddenly have something. It's not a lot of fun at times. And that's why I've steered away from this narrative of it being a superpower, because in my opinion, that only tells part of the story. And while I wouldn't necessarily change who I am, and I know that I have some great strengths to offer, I also know that, as you probably do, at the time going through something like that can be so isolating, because people don't understand what it's like when you're dealing with an invisible form of autoimmunity, or when you can't focus much as you try to and fit into those workplace practices and timings and structures. And if you don't have people advocating for you or willing to support and make adjustments, then it can be a really lonely place. And this is why we're seeing so many neurodivergent people exit the corporate world and move into entrepreneurship or complete career changes. So there's some great talent going out of the window, sadly, and organizations don't even know why necessarily, unless there's an open conversation. And the other thing that I've really noticed as well, which hopefully part of my work can help to change, is that people don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking up about their neurodiversity, because while a company might say on their website, oh, we're really inclusive, we celebrate different people and different perspectives, it's all very well and good. But when there's a deadline and a low budget or other external pressures, whether or not the organization is actually going to listen and support the individual is a completely different conversation. I think it's really important that it doesn't just become something that organizations do on a performative basis, but something they actually understand is commercially beneficial to both them.
Absolutely. And I think there are so many different ways of doing it, because I think that one of the key areas that people always come to me and talk about when they're in the area that we'd sort of look at as being like well-being or diversity, equity and inclusion, which is very much where ADHD awareness is sitting in organizations these days, is they'll be like, oh yeah, but they just want a lunch and learn, and it's a tick box exercise. And I think it's so interesting because you've had some really, really successful things that you've sold this year. And not once have I ever seen you come back from delivering something where you're like, oh, that was just a tick box. That organization didn't really care. And I think that for me, I always assume that that's down to the sales process. Did we qualify the company? Did we qualify the lead? Did we have an actual talk with the stakeholder about, what is going to be the best thing that will work, or best delivery method that will work for your employees? And that's something you've really explored this year, and you've sold a lot of different types of offers. So what do you think for you has been the most impactful? Where do you see the most impact being made in organizations?
I think we're only just scratching the surface, to be honest. I think there's a huge opportunity here, and it's something that I'm looking to build upon in 2024 for sure. I think there's so many more things in my pipeline that I'm planning to roll out, which is really, really exciting. But I think initially it is that awareness piece. And I was quite surprised when I started doing things like lunch and learns or keynote speeches, because actually people were asking questions that I thought were kind of obvious, but the awareness just isn't there. And I think in order to be able to have those maybe difficult conversations, roll out adjustments and lead from the top down, there needs to first of all be this awareness piece. And if that's not there, then people aren't going to understand the why or the how behind why it needs to happen. So interestingly, there's been a huge amount of interest in ADHD awareness and what it is, why people experience it, and the impact that that has within their working lives. I think there's always that ethical side of, okay, how is the individual feeling? Like, how's their mental health? Are they struggling in their home life, or are they supporting a child with neurodiversity, which is always another thing to consider that we don't necessarily realize when we talk about neurodiversity, how vast and wide reaching the impact is. But essentially, on a corporate level within the organization, there's so limited understanding and knowledge of what it even is and how that can impact someone's day-to-day working life, that it's been really fun and interesting and rewarding to be able to just share some of that beginning knowledge and understanding. There's very few organizations, I think, that are really ahead of the game on this, and I think we will start to see, hopefully, more and more begin to implement strategies to support neurodivergent talent.
I think that's really exciting. And I think, the interesting thing about it is that there's so much room for impact to be made. It just relies on you actually going out there and selling the things. So let's talk about that, because I think when we met, you came to a Converting Corporates event.
Yeah.
You were very diligent. You sat right at the front, took lots of notes, and which was really good. And I remember you being like, will corporates buy this? Is this something that they're interested in? And obviously you've been in the C-suite, what now, 11 months, 10 months?
I started in January.
What's changed? Like, what's changed about how you feel about the sales process for a start?
It's really interesting. We were having this conversation on a call recently, and I think one of the biggest shifts for me has definitely been the emotional attachment to the sales process. And again, going back to, for those of us who are ADHD, we can really struggle with rejection sensitivity.
Yep.
Kind of unanimous symptoms. So sales can feel like a really scary thing, because you are going to face rejection. And unless you're some sort of masochist, you feel a little bit uncomfortable to begin with. I've done quite a bit of sales in the past, and I can say it does get easier, but what's made it easier, I think, in the C-suite is being able to build enough of a pipeline for that to not feel personal, if that makes sense. Because I think people fall down because they think, like, I've contacted 5 companies and no one's replied. What's wrong with you? What you teach is obviously so different to that. It really opens your mind up to, like, the level of activity you need to be doing in order to build a solid enough pipeline to get the wins, so that the rejections or the temporary rejections don't feel that quite as painful. And also to recognize that a no can turn into a yes. And that is what has happened in one of my early examples of one of my first clients that I signed after joining. And that was initially a no, but maybe in the future kind of conversation. And so many people would find that off-putting, I think, and internalize that and just be scared to send that email. And what you have really helped me with is getting a bit uncomfortable and sending the email, asking for the feedback, asking for the sale when we thought they would say no. That's been a really big part of it. And I remember early on when I had like one BD call, my first BD call, and it didn't turn into a sale and a proposal. And I felt really rejected about it. And you're quite direct, which is really helpful. No one's ever said that before, have they? And you said to me, you wouldn't feel this way if you had a full pipeline of sales activity and prospective clients. And then fast forwarding to later in the year, when I had a lot more sales activity going on and historical data and interest, I did get a couple of rejections, and it was kind of like, okay, that's fine. You either want it or not. And it's not my job to ask why, which is what I would have previously done, like spiraled into that, like, why don't they like me? Is it me? Am I not qualified enough in their eyes? Am I not capable enough? Or is my LinkedIn not flashy enough? I've managed to separate that and just see it as a process and more data driven and scientifically driven, which is something that sometimes my creative mind struggles with. So it's always a journey, and I wouldn't say it never like feels emotional, but I've definitely taken a lot of the emotion out of the sales process. So that's been a really big thing that I've taken.
I think that's a huge win, because at the end of the day, you are not your business. And I think that when you've sold B2C previously, there's this temptation to be like, you are your business, you are your USP, your self-worth is directly attached to how much you make or how many sales you land. And it's like, no, yes, you're more invested in your business because it's yours, it's your baby, you're building it. But like you say, sales is a very boring and simple process. If you do the right things, you'll get the right outputs. It doesn't need you to be personally invested in if I get a no, there must be something wrong with me. It's okay, if I get a no, what are the controllable factors that I could have done differently? I'll do that next time. Great, let's move on. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And knowing what to do in that situation has been invaluable, because previously there was a bit of a knowledge gap for me in what, once I get that response, maybe seeing that as a don't ever speak to me again. But I've been able to find other avenues and ways to take that from where it is initially into hopefully one day becoming an opportunity. So that's been a really, really helpful gap that you've helped me to close.
I love that. And you've done some incredible things as well. I think it's always interesting because people do tend to come along and they think, oh, but will it work for me? Can I really sell anything that's going to make an impact? And you've gone almost full circle in the types of things that you've sold. You've really progressed with your speaking. And I know that was a huge goal for you when you started.
Yeah.
You were like, I want to be a speaker, but I'm not sure whether companies will buy it. And now you are regularly a keynote speaker and doing all those things and creating that impact on a wider scale. That's also a big change to your business, finding a model that works for you.
Yeah, I think so. And I think trying to play to my own strengths and not be someone else, because obviously living with ADHD and an autoimmune disorder, some things aren't your strengths and that's okay. But I've always been fairly decent as a speaker, and I've done a lot more training and getting out there and actually building my experience this year to a point now where I am getting paid quite well to do keynotes. And that's something that weirdly, in a kind of masochistic way, I really enjoy. I know most people who speak will relate to this. You might still feel the nerves beforehand.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it probably means you're not invested enough and don't care enough. But equally, it's so rewarding to connect with people on that level. And I feel as though that is perhaps one of my strengths. And I've been able to leverage that and recognize that that is something that corporates buy and want to have, and also that they have budget for, because there's so many people out there who probably think, oh, they would never pay me more than £200 to do a keynote. And it's simply not the case, especially some of the examples in the C-suite who have been doing it longer than me. They're getting paid really good money to do keynote talks. And I think that's a mindset shift that I've definitely had. And I've noticed my mindset grow in terms of what can I actually charge, and not necessarily feeling as though there's a limit to that. Had done previously. And for some people, they can walk in and be like, I'm going to charge 10 grand for a keynote. And that's great. I think for me, it's something that I've gradually built upon based on my own confidence and mindset, and also experience, testimonials, positive feedback, and getting uncomfortable and being willing to do that, which you've really helped me with, because you don't have as much emotional attachment to that as I do. So having that external coach being able to just see it in more clear terms is really, really useful as well.
One of the questions I do have is about the process itself, because I speak to a lot of people who would identify as being neurodiverse. So am I. I think initially there's that feeling when you are neurodivergent where you're like, I hate processes. Especially with ADHD, where like, I'd rather just be almost like given creative free reign to do all the things all the time whenever you feel like it. And obviously the C-suite's very different from that. And it is a process, and it is go and follow these things, go and do these things. What do you think now that you're in it? Because I know that from the outside, people are like, oh, I just don't like the idea of process, or I don't like the idea of recording things, or I don't like the idea of following one strategy through, and I want creative reign and blah, 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 blah. As somebody who is neurodivergent, and let's be clear, I'm not asking Gemma to speak on behalf of all people with ADHD. I'm not doing that myself, but how do you feel now that you're implementing the process?
This is really funny. I was thinking about this the other day, because personally for me, and I think many others with ADHD can relate to this, processes can be your best friend and your greatest enemy. I think it comes down to whether or not the process is actually as efficient and easy to implement as it can be, and whether or not it works and makes sense, because we don't like red tape for the sake of red tape. I don't personally. I've never been that kind of person who loves a spreadsheet or taking down notes on everything that happens. And there are some very bureaucratic organizations, and a lot of great leaders will say that this is the biggest block for creativity. So we don't want to take that out of the equation. But what I really liked about your process is it makes sense. It's logical, and it's not just doing it for the sake of doing it, like so many courses online where it's just no real reason behind it. It's just fluff and sales talk to get people in, but they're not really getting the results at the end. So I really have found it useful, because if I didn't have this process, I wouldn't have good note taking on my leads. I wouldn't have a place to collectively put all of my leads, to contact people, to remind me to follow up, because that's another thing. And I'm sure you'll relate to this, but my brain can be like a sieve at times. Yeah. So trying to remember to follow up with someone I spoke to 2 months ago who said, contact me in 2 months. I would not remember that. And I wouldn't necessarily even know the context around it. So the process has really helped me with that. And also taking it from lead generation through to a client and an upsell. It just makes sense and it works. And once you've done the legwork, which can be really daunting and overwhelming, and I certainly can agree, when you first start doing business development, especially if you've not done a lot before, there's a lot of setup in order to build that process, but it is there to make your life so much easier in the long term. So if you're able to see that and take those baby steps and just do the things you need to do, then trust in the process that it will help you in the long term. And that's been so much easier for me. And I think you've probably designed it in a way that works for other people who have ADHD without realizing, because it is a lot easier and it takes a lot of the hassle and the dread. And I don't know about you, but we talked about this. I've been submitting my accounts and I really don't like accounts and spreadsheets and numbers. So I kind of put it off, but I don't do that with the BD process, because I've already got it set up and it's manageable and it's not overwhelming anymore. In fact, it doesn't need to take as long as people think. I really like your process and it's really, really helped me.
I really appreciate that. I think it is one of those things I say to people all the time, if you're a doer, then the C-suite is easy, or as easy as something can be. Because if you're prepared to just follow the strategy and customize the templates and just implement, it's fine. It removes the procrastination element of like, oh, should I use this word or this word when I reply? Should I send them a one-pager with every single thing that I could ever possibly sell to them on it? Or should I just send them the one thing that's going to be most useful? And I always say to people who think, oh, Jess, it's just a natural thing for you to sell. And I really like sales. I've been doing it for 15 years almost. So it's much more of a habit now than it ever has been. It will probably become even more of a habit because I'm going to continue to do it for a few more years. I still use the C-suite. I use the exact stuff that I tell you guys to use, because it's so much less mental energy and decision making on my part to be like, oh, those really good objection handling things that I wrote out, great, I'll just send one of them. Or, oh, that lead generation system that I designed, yeah, great, let's use that. And as somebody who is ADHD, I'm kind of like, yeah, cool. Anything I can do to make a boring task easier, I'll do. And that is the templates and that is the process. And it's just nice when people use them.
I think we often overthink things and overcomplicate things. So it's been really helpful to have templates almost that after a while become second nature, because you see the same responses and you have the ideal response already laid out, hopefully. So it's really helpful because I overthink things and sometimes the wording isn't quite there for me. And if you have that creative block at times, then sometimes you know what you want to say, but you can't necessarily express it in a way that is sales friendly. So that's really, really helped me as well.
I love it. Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, this has been absolutely amazing. And as I always ask at the end of every episode, if there is somebody who's listening to this thinking, should I jump in to the C-suite? Should I make a big investment in my business, in myself, and join something like the C-suite to build out my B2B sales process? What would your recommendation be? Your honest opinion. I say this to everybody. I'm like, I'm not paying anyone to say good things. You can give your honest opinion, but what would you say?
My advice is, if you are prepared to actually do it, then go for it 100%. There's so many people that hop from thing to thing and chase the next shiny object and then end up disappointed. And that has been the case. Like, there's so many, especially B2C courses out there, that are not really very ethically selling things that people don't need. People obviously always have that, oh, if I invest, will it get the ROI that I'm looking for? Or is it just going to make me feel good about myself?
Yeah.
It will get the ROI that you're looking for. And I would also say, if anyone's on the fence about doing B2B sales, I've done both. And I always come back to focusing on B2B because it's a lot more lucrative. There's a lot more boundaries in place. It's a lot more easy to have work-life balance. And so the C-suite just gives you a shortcut to getting there rather than having to cut through all of the noise and learn it yourself and worry and wonder if it's actually being done correctly. So that's been really invaluable to me, having that best practice start to finish process to follow. So I would say go for it, but don't just expect it to magically be manifested. Don't expect Mercury retrograde, as you would say, to do the work for you. You have to do it. And if you are going to do the work, then you will get the result.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, this has been amazing. I know that so many people find it really useful. If people are listening and thinking, actually, I know an organisation who needs ADHD awareness training or consulting, where's the best place for them to come and find you and connect you?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn, and I'm Gemma Allies. If you're listening after October 2024, I might be Gemma Rivero. So Ebeiro, as I'm getting married next year. Not to go on about it too much, but
it's a very exciting time. We love a wedding.
It's exciting. And as we were kind of mapping out 2024, it's something that I'm already trying to fit into my BD process for next year, rather than end up with that stress beforehand of, oh my God, I haven't got up to date in order to turn my out of office on. So that's been really, really helpful as well. But please do reach out, add me on LinkedIn, even just to say hi as well. It's always nice. I will always reply.
Oh, I love it. And I'll make sure that your LinkedIn profile is in the comments. So whether you are Allies or Rivero, it won't matter. It'll all be sorted. And we'll all look forward, obviously, to seeing wedding photos because you will look lovely. I'm very, very excited about that part of it. If you have enjoyed today's episode, I do always say, but please do go and share your breakthroughs with Gemma, because it takes time out of people's day to come onto the podcast and share what their journey has been like and their breakthroughs, so that you can benefit and start thinking about the things that you want to implement in your business and how you want to make key changes. So please do go over onto LinkedIn, connect with Gemma and let her know what your big breakthrough has been from today's episode. And we will see you in the next one.